Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala ashraf al-anbiya wal mursaleen. Nabiyyina wa qudwatina Muhammad alayhi afdalus salat wa azka taslim. Allahumma a'limna bima yanfa'una wa anfa'na bima 'allamtana wa zidna ilman ya Rabbil Alameen. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, everybody. Welcome to the women's class Thursday evening. Riyadh al-Saliheen by Imam al-Nawawi. And we have moved the class time up because of the Maghrib moving earlier in the day. And I think we might take a break after this class, inshallah ta'ala, for a couple weeks, just until we kind of set up reload for the fall. Changes to the schedule are going to have to happen. We've got the Sunday school that's going to start up, inshallah ta'ala. We've got the weekday school that's going to start up. And so some things are going to have to be looked at. So I'm thinking that this is going to be the last class for a couple weeks, and you can all have a holiday, a break, inshallah ta'ala. But not before we finish, inshallah ta'ala, an entire chapter tonight, the chapter on truthfulness, which we had started last week. We have our coffee, and away we go. So we had discussed the ayat, and remember the style of Imam al-Nawawi is to support everything that he's about to compile. That makes me think of something I didn't think to say before, which is actually a really interesting point. You'll hear some people say about certain books, for example, a book is only composed of quotes from the Quran and quotes from the Sunnah, quotes from the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. And so anybody who takes issue with this particular book is only disagreeing with the Quran or with the Sunnah. What do you think? Do you think this is an accurate description? And pardon me for just a second. Chew on that for a second, and I'll be right back. Someone I think is knocking at the door. Okay, just had to double check, make sure that everybody who wanted to attend in person had the opportunity to attend in person. Sometimes people lock the door to the women's side, so I wanted to make sure that wasn't the case. So the question was, Sister Zahira just came in, and we have Sister Samira coming in right now. Okay, so here we go. So the question is, all right, Samira is here. The question is, if I have a book, I write a book, and it's just quotes from the Quran and just quotes from the Sunnah, the Hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah. Is it accurate? Is it accurate if I claim that if you disagree with my book, then you're only disagreeing with the Quran and the Sunnah? Discuss. Asmat's too smart. Does the author have no influence on the text at all? And if so, what is that influence? Can the author speak through a text, even if all the letters and words are taken from the Quran and Sunnah? Because you'll hear this, and I'm not going to say which books this is often claimed about, but there are certain books that are, depending on if you, Sister Zahira is onto it too. Yes, they could not quote the entire hadith, right? Yes. So don't fall for this line, because this is something that has become popular for some people to say. Certain books that are either famous or notorious, depending on your kind of what you think, your orientation, within Islam. Right, etc., etc. I think those are good examples. Exactly. The work of the author is not erased just because all of the words are taken from the Quran or Sunnah, right? And there's multiple ways through which the author can speak. Okay, like all of you are saying, oh yeah, I bet. So it's just, yeah, I bet it's online all over the place, right? As we would say, heavy on dalil and light on dalala, right? Dalil refers to a piece of evidence, and dalala refers to the relevance of that evidence, right? So oftentimes we have people who are all about the dalil, but they don't have any dalala. They don't have any ability to prove that what they're referencing is actually applicable to what they're trying to imply that it applies to. Yes, exactly. So the author always speaks, whether it comes to the quoting, right? There are things that can be quoted out of context or clipped, especially with hadith. There are things that you can quote the entire text, but they were revealed in a specific context or refer to something more specific than the language implies, right? And we had this happen just a couple of weeks ago. We were talking about la taghdab, right? The hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, don't get angry, right? And we asked the question, is this something that can be taken at face value? Don't ever get angry about anything. If we were to say that that's as general and absolute as it sounds, then the Prophet ﷺ would have been a hypocrite because he got angry sometimes. We have many hadith where he got up on the minbar and he talked to the people and his face got turned red with anger. So what gives? What gives is that even the Prophet ﷺ, he said, La taghdab, don't get angry. He's referring to a specific type of anger. An anger that is anger for the self, for the nafs, that's defending kind of whatever is convenient for you. Whereas the anger that is actually not only allowed, but praiseworthy and necessary is the anger that results in justice, the anger that holds people accountable, the anger that seeks, the anger that can't stand to see something wrong or oppression, right? And so context, oh yeah, it matters. And then especially in books like this that are compilation, the order in which you put things, it sends a message, right? Like you don't have to say it yourself. But if I, for example, if I take all the ayat about jihad, that are about go and slay and fight the disbelievers and slay them wherever you find them, etc., 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 and I put it in a certain order, it really, really paints a certain picture. And now and then, if I kind of I can surround it with other kinds of quotes or hadith that makes it seem like these sorts of things might even apply to certain Muslims, right? And that would be far, far, far off from the correct normative orthodox interpretation of those ayahs. They talk about a very, very specific context. First of all, not against Muslims. Second of all, only when certain conditions of warfare are met, and there's a whole field of looking into what is just war theory in Islam, and we won't get into that now, but suffice it to say, the point is, and this is just off the cuff, it's not accurate. If you hear anybody claiming that, oh, well, how can you disagree with this? It's just Quran and Sunnah. The interpretation, the context, the implication, what are you trying to say through how you stitch these quotes together, or which quotes you're selecting, right? The act of selection in and of itself is an act of interpretation. Why did you choose all of the ayat about fire and brimstone? Why didn't you choose all the ones about mercy, etc., etc., etc.? At any rate, the author, and I didn't even bring up, excuse me, let me get this up here. In the beginning of the chapter, we started last class, a chapter on truthfulness, a sidq. And we had talked previously about the ayat, because Imam Nawawi does introduce the hadith that he is about to compile in this collection with ayats from the Quran. And we talked about all those last class, so I won't repeat that. The hadith that we reached now is number 56. Okay, and this is a little snippet from a longer hadith. It's very famous. You guys probably have heard of it before, where Abu Sufyan is traveling with a group of traders, and they're going through the lands of Rome, or Byzantine Empire, more specifically. And Heraclius, who was the governor or emperor, whatever you want, realizes that they're traveling through, had heard of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, and so calls them into his presence. Now, Heraclius is a pretty sharp guy. And so he wants to make sure, he wants to extract information out of these Arab tradesmen about this guy who claims to be a prophet. But he wants to make sure that they're not just going to tell him lies. And so what he does is he tells Abu Sufyan to stand in front, like right in front of him. And he tells the other men that are accompanying him to stand behind him. And if Abu Sufyan is to utter a single false word or misrepresent or mischaracterize the answers to the questions or the mission of the nature of the prophet, then the people who are behind him are supposed to signal that he's lying, right? And so this is blind review, right? Just like a good scholarly study, right? It's peer reviewed and it's double blind, and nobody can tell. So there's no punitive possibility for Abu Sufyan's comrades if they speak out and call him a liar. And Abu Sufyan, within the pre-modern moral universe, is ashamed to be seen as a liar. This is one of the great characteristics of the Arabs, even before Islam, is that they honored the word very, very much so. And they believed in telling the truth as much as possible. And so it was a very, very big deal for someone to be considered a liar. So that's the setup here. We have Abu Sufyan right in front of Heraclius, the other kind of tradesmen that are with him, behind him, ready to point out his errors or his exaggerations. And one of the things that Heraclius asks, and this is a small hadith, or excuse me, a small snippet of that longer hadith where Heraclius really, really grills him about all these sorts of different aspects. At one point, Heraclius said, "What does he order you to do? What's the message? What's the end game? What is the prophet, or this so-called prophet, to him? What does he want from you?" And so Abu Sufyan replies to worship Allah alone and to not associate anything with him and to abandon what our ancestors said. And here's another example of something that is worded very generally, but it means something specific. Abandon what our ancestors said is qualified and specified by what comes before it. We're talking about worship, right? Because the ancestors said lots of things. They said to eat this food, it's good for your health, and etc., etc. And we're not rejecting all of that. We're only rejecting the part where they were instructing their descendants to worship other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then he continues, he says he commands us to pray, to speak the truth, to be chaste, and to maintain ties of kinship. And this is both in Sahih Bukhari and Muslim. So we see the relevance of this hadith to the broader chapter, to speak the truth, right? This is one of the things that the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ stressed, to speak the truth. And this is, it was interesting because I did the radio interview at the local radio station, Talk, whatever it is, I don't remember the letters. And they were sharing with me after I did this was back in Ramadan, they were sharing with me some of the comments, you know, and people are very brave in the comment section, you know, so people are accusing us of, you know, this and that or the other, Muslims this, Muslims that. And, you know, it's important. It's very, very important that Muslims tell the truth, especially in a non-Muslim country, right? Because if anybody plays around or is lax with telling the truth, then it affects all of us. It affects all of us. And this is where I'm coming from, because people in American culture, the ones that are kind of, you know, very, very much against Muslims and against Islam, what is their one single biggest claim against us, why we should be feared, why we should be suspected, why we should be kind of not accorded the same level of trust and acceptance as other people. The claim is that because we're being dishonest, we're not forthcoming, we're secretly a fifth column, right? We're secretly allied to some like foreign powers or whatever, but we hide it and we conceal it. And so you can't trust anything that a Muslim tells you. In fact, if a Muslim tells you otherwise, that's even confirmation that, you know, he's lying. Instead, you're supposed to trust them, right? And what they say about Muslims and Islam, etc., etc. And that's ridiculous. Okay, we know that. That's obvious. But it actually has come from one of the practices of the Shia, right? If this concept of taqiyya, maybe you've heard of it before. What is taqiyya? Taqiyya in Sunni Islam is the permission to say something that's not true in order to save your life if it's in danger. So if this is from Ammar, right? The story of Ammar, very, very early on in the history of Islam, they're getting tortured. His parents are both killed. He's getting tortured. He is told that all you have to do to end it is just to denounce the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, denounce Islam. And in a fit of kind of delirium, he does it. And then he goes back to the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam and he's sobbing and he's crying. And you think that he's sobbing and crying because his parents just got murdered. But no, it's actually because he said this word that was untrue. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exonerated him in the Quran and said that it's fine. In those circumstances, you're completely in a life or death situation. And you're saying a word that you don't believe in order to save your life. In Sunni Islam, that is called taqiyya. And it's a very, very, very minute, you know, thing that most Muslims never have to think about. Most Muslims never have to, you know, it's not even on their radar. However, in Shia Islam, or at least the, you know, many branches of Shia Islam, taqiyya is something that is much abused. It's something where you can basically lie about anything and everything if there's a certain advantage or interest behind it. And so even if someone comes into the masjid and you ask them, are you, you know, I noticed that you slap your thighs after you're done praying, or, you know, you carry a little bit of dirt from Karbala along with you, you know, all these sorts of things that I saw the Shia in Medina do. And they'll say, no, I'm not Shia, right? This is something that is acceptable to them. So look at how this little bit of dishonesty has affected all of us in America and Western nations, where we are suffering. You know, the Shia are only 10% of Muslims worldwide, very, very small minority. And yet we are suffering the consequences of them kind of abusing this concept of taqiyya. The most kind of belligerent and enemies of Islam in the West won't even listen to what we have to say because they think that it's all just a lie, it's just a sham, it's just a show. The Prophet ﷺ, he tells us to speak the truth. And the person, as we said in the last class, the person who speaks the truth will never, ever, ever regret. Because the person who speaks the truth is the path to peace. And the truth is the path to tranquility, right? Whereas falsehood is the path to anxiety, right? We see this all the time. If you tell a lie, everybody knows, you're going to have to tell another lie to cover your first lie. And then all of a sudden, you're caught in this web where you've told so many lies, you have to make the story square, right? And where's your peace? You're going to have to keep track of all of that. You're constantly afraid that someone is going to discover you, that your cover is going to be blown. And so that is the path to anxiety. That's the not straight way. That's not sirat al-mustaqim. And so he ordered us to pray. Okay, easy enough. Speak the truth. Yes, do. Be chaste. Being chaste is a dirty word these days in the times that we live in. Chastity, virginity are concepts that are aggressively profaned, right? I mean, anybody who's gone to a public school or college, knows that it's almost like a game or a competition. People cheer other people on to lose that chastity or to lose that virginity. And so in our day and age, it seems like something that's very prudish, right? Oh my God, you're just this, what's the incel, right? They have this nice term for people who are quote unquote involuntarily celibate, which is kind of bantied about as an insult. And people have completely lost sight of what is the purpose behind chastity and what is the purpose behind virginity in the first place. And this is not something that I'm talking about just because this is a class of females. This is something for males and females. And that's something that's regrettable, because in Muslim culture, sometimes the way that Muslims practice their culture, sometimes they are only concerned about the chastity of their females, and they are not concerned about the chastity of their males, and sexual indiscretions are tolerated from boys and young men, and that is absolutely backwards. Absolutely backwards. Because the point of chastity and virginity in the first place is the same as speaking the truth. It's the same as speaking the truth, in that it is tranquility. It's the path to tranquility. How? Why is chastity and virginity the path to tranquility? And we're not talking about lifelong chastity or virginity. We're talking about virginity until marriage, right? It's the path to tranquility because when someone is married, they have at least a baseline assurance that this person is committed enough to them that they will not be left high and dry, that they will not be left to bear all of the consequences or responsibilities, let's say, of a relationship, right? Well, that's why in Islam, all sexual activity outside of the context of marriage is forbidden, whether it's boy, 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 girl, 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 anything you want. Anything outside of marriage, and a specific definition of marriage is illicit. It's forbidden. Because relationships hurt when they are abusive. They hurt when they are exploitative. They can ruin your life. They can cause trauma. They can cause you to never relate to relationships the same way again, or the opposite gender the same way again. The stakes are very, very high. And so the act of intimacy, which is something that is so personal, and there's so much vulnerability, both in the moment of intimacy and in the things that might result from that moment of intimacy. It is reckless and foolish and dangerous to let that happen outside of a context of checks and balances, outside of a context of rights and responsibilities, enforceable accountability. Yes. If we don't have that enforceable accountability, people get hurt. And that hurt, there's so many different types of that hurt. There is physical hurt, there is emotional hurt, there's spiritual hurt, there is economic and socioeconomic hurt. And who bears the brunt of that hurt 9 times out of 10? Women. So the point of chastity and the point of virginity is not because we are in the Western tongue. It's not because we're, what do they call it? It's not because we're anti-sex, right? Or we're prudes, or we're, it's kind of like with Protestant Christians, like they tended to be, which is what has caused the equal and opposite reaction. It's not because of that at all. The Prophet ﷺ, Aisha described him as having immense endurance when it came to intimacy, right? He used to visit every single one of his wives every single day. SubhanAllah. And I won't bore you with the other details, but there's a lot of material on that and the companions and how they used to be, etc. We're not prudes, okay, in our tradition. But at the same time, we're not stupid, right? We understand that that thing is sacred. That intimacy is sacred. That vulnerability is sacred. The children that might result from that intimacy and vulnerability are sacred. And anything that is sacred has to be protected. It can't be left up to chance or whim. What happens in non-Muslim culture? Females are pressured to think that they have to put out in order to get a man to commit. And once the man gets what he wants, he has no incentive to commit. Why would he voluntarily sign himself up for accountability? And this is proven by data. There is data out there that shows that couples who cohabit and live together before they get married are actually more likely to divorce than couples that do not cohabit before they're married. Allahu Akbar. To be chaste and to maintain ties of kinship, which go together. All those three things go together. In their tranquility, in the checks and balances, all these sorts of things. To speak the truth, to be chaste, and to maintain ties of kinship. There is one disclaimer when it comes to the general insistence and ethic of telling the truth. There are few situations where it is permissible in Islamic law to tell a little white lie in order to bring people together and make people feel good, right? So if your husband comes to you, right, and he's been working on this thing, or maybe he decides that he's going to make a meal for you, you know, he's out of the goodness of his heart, he wants to give you a night off from cooking, and he makes this food, and it is the worst food you've ever tasted. It's barely edible. He thought the salt was sugar, and he thought the sugar was salt, and he overcooked and undercooked and everything in between. And he asks you, honey, how was it? Are you allowed to lie? Are you allowed to tell a white lie in that situation? Oh yeah, you are. Recommended, right? This is called tarwiyah. Never tasted any. Oh, hey, look at that, Esmat. You're a little too sharp, Esmat. I gotta look out for you, because that is both true. It's true in both ways. Open to interpretation. I never tasted, never tasted anything like it. Out of this world, right? MashaAllah. That is permissible to do. If you have two people that are feuding, arguing, disputing, you call up one of them and say, hey, look, so-and-so, the other person, they didn't mean what they said. And they really did mean what they said. But you're trying to bring them down. You're trying to patch up the relationship. And then you call the other one. You're like, hey, look, you know, so-and-so, they're really regret, you know, how that went down. They're, you know, it could all be untrue. But that is one of the few very limited situations in which you're allowed to fudge the truth in order for the greater good. Excellent. Next hadith. Abu Thabit Sahal ibn Hunayf, who was at Badr, a martyr, or not a martyr, but a participant of Badr, reported that the Prophet ﷺ said, if someone asks Allah Almighty for martyrdom with true sincerity, Allah Azza wa Jalla will raise him to the level of martyrs, even if he lies in his bed. What does this hadith have to do with the chapter title? We're in the chapter of truthfulness. Let's see what y'all think. How does this hadith relate to truthfulness? Doesn't seem to at first. It's just about martyrdom. The hadith is, if someone asks Allah Azza wa Jal for martyrdom with true sincerity, Allah will raise that person to the level of martyrs even if he dies in his bed, meaning even if he never goes out. And this is an interesting anecdote, not personal, of course, but Khalid ibn al-Walid, who was one of the most famous Muslim generals of all time, companion of the Prophet ﷺ, fought uncountable battles, won all of them, and yet he died at home on his bed, never got the martyrdom that he sought. Asma says, the truth to yourself, you really want to be a martyr, and no ounce of pride or show-offness. Yes, exactly. What we're talking about here is truthfulness in one's intentions, right? The Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, is that deeds, actions are rewarded by their intentions. So if somebody is really serious, if somebody truly intends something, desires something, with no, as our sister said, ego, and no kind of showing off, and no, etc., etc., the distance between that person and actually having done the action is very, very small. It's almost as if the person has already done the action. They're just, maybe something's holding them back, maybe something's preventing them. And so if we take the lesson from this hadith, then we can apply it to other things as well. If it's true for something that is so important and lofty as martyrdom, right? And martyrdom has something that is many specific rules attached to it, as far as what happens to the body after it's dead, and what happens to the soul, and all these sorts of things. Resurrection without hisab, without kind of a reckoning, all these sorts of amazing things. Then of course it's going to be true also for that which is less weighty than that, or less lofty, or less significant. Which is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, لِيَبَلُوَكُمْ أَيُّكُمْ أَحْسَنُ عَمَلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Mulk and in other places that He created all of this world in order to test which of you was best in deed, not most in deed, not loudest in deed, but who is the most sincere. And for the person who has the most sincerity, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give them whatever it is that they set their heart to. Okay, are we gonna maybe possibly finish? Okay, there's 2 hadith left in this chapter. Let's do it. Bismillah. This one's a little bit longer. Okay, so Abu Hurairah reported that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, one of the prophets, may Allah's peace and blessings be upon them, went on an expedition, meaning a military expedition, and he said to the people, a man who has contracted a marriage with a woman and wants to consummate that marriage, but hasn't yet done so, don't come with me. Okay, if you just got married but you haven't done the deed, stay home. Nor should anyone who has built a house and not yet raised its roof. Okay, so you've got your house that's being built, it's not yet done, it's almost done, stay home. Anybody who has bought a sheep or a camel, and the camel is pregnant and it's due to give birth any minute, any day, stay home. Don't come with me. Why? Pause, question, why? What does it have to do with going to battle? He doesn't want these kinds of people in his army. And some of the scholars, they say that this is actually Yusha bin Nun, the prophet that we're talking about here. It's not absolutely certain, but many of the scholars opined that it was. What's the connection? Why would that sort of stuff be an obstacle to someone who's going out to fight? Yes, very good answers, both of them. Yes, exactly. Right. They've got unfinished business, right? So either it's going to affect their performance, or either it's going to kind of be an obstacle to them being truthful in their fight. Because a true fight, a true jihad, the valid jihad, the permissible jihad, is one with, as we said just a second ago, with no ego, with complete selflessness, to say that, Allah, this is my life, you can take it, whether I come back or whether I stay there, it's the same to me. We are going to defend our people, we're going to defend Islam, we're going to repel the aggressors, and I submit myself to you. And so he doesn't want any kinds of those people to be in his army. So that's the relationship to the larger chapter, the chapter of truthfulness. Okay, then it continues. So he went on the expedition, and he approached the town at the time of Asr prayer, or around Asr prayer, and he said to the son, he says, you are under command and I am under command. And he's meaning that we're both servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he says, oh Allah, please hold back the sun for us. And the sun was held back until Allah gave him victory. So he's afraid that the sun is going to set. And so he asks Allah to make dua, he makes dua to Allah to not let the sun set until the battle is over, no matter how long it takes. And Allah gives him that, and this is a miracle. Victory comes, okay. He gathers all the spoils, and he's lighting a fire. Now, okay, that needs explanation. So we are the only ummah where it was permissible to actually take the spoils of a fight. Before that, what they used to do is they used to light it all on fire as a ritual sacrifice to Allah. So the people of Moses and the people of the prophets before, if they went into battle and if they were victorious, they would round up all of the spoils and they would light it on fire as a burnt offering for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they're going to do this. Here we go, fire. But the fire didn't catch. It didn't catch on all of the stuff that they had gotten. So then he starts to think, and he says, wait a second, some of you took things for yourself. Some of you guys stole from the spoils. And everyone, now he goes through this process of trying to vet everybody, like who did it, who did it, who did it. And he goes around and he asks for everybody to give him their pledge of allegiance, and he shakes everybody's hands. And another miracle happens where anybody who took something, stole something from what was supposed to be sacrificed for Allah, then their hand would stick inside of his until he was able to identify this person, that person, you guys stole. And so they brought everything that they had stolen from the spoils of war, and they put it down, and then they tried the fire again, and the fire actually worked. And then the end of the hadith is that the spoils were not lawful to anyone before us. Then Allah Azza wa Jal made spoils lawful for us. Allah saw our weakness and incapacity, and so he made it lawful for us. So a few quick things. This is another good illustration of something that I try to drive home to everybody, that there's a difference between Aqeedah and Shariah when it comes to what is the reality of this world, this creation, this universe, and what is expected of us of responsibility, how we should act, what we should do. Okay, non-Muslim reads this, they're like, wait a second, this is a contradiction. How come Moses had to burn the spoils of war and you guys get to enjoy the spoils of war? How come, maybe Jesus prayed this way and you guys pray this other way? Right? How come the Christians were allowed to drink alcohol and Muslims aren't allowed to drink alcohol? This is a contradiction. You guys are just making up stuff as you go along. The common sort of things. No. There's a contradiction is only possible if there's a discrepancy in reality, the Aqeedah, right? If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that there are angels, there are 2 angels on your shoulders right now, and after you die, you're going down into the grave, your soul will be interned in the grave, you'll be visited by 2 different angels, you'll be asked different questions, etc., etc., etc. So he tells one group that. And then he tells either the same group or a different group, no, actually, angels aren't real. Really what happens when you die is your soul kind of wanders around as like a ghost, right? Or goes right up to the clouds and it smiles down upon the living, etc., etc. Or actually, no, you're reincarnated. And if you were good, then you've got good karma and you kind of move up the food chain. And if you were bad, then you get demoted down the food chain, right? These are contradictions because they have to do with reality. They have to do with Aqeedah, what exists, what is real, right? Is Allah one or is he three? This is something that if you're ever in a debate with a Christian, you can get them with every time. Did Moses preach a Trinity, a Trinitarian God? No, he did not. Not anywhere in the Bible. If people are claiming that you can only get to heaven by accepting Jesus as Lord and Savior, did Moses accept Jesus as his Lord and Savior? Oopsies. Looks like Moses is going to hell under the mainstream Christian theology. So this has to do with theology, Aqeedah, what is real. Shariah is different. Shariah is not just based off of reality, it's based off of maslahah. It's based off of what is in the best interest of people. And what is representative or leads to the best interest of people is amendable, and it does change a little bit from time to time and place to place. You're not going to find dramatic, crazy changes. You're not going to find one group of people where murder is okay and another group of people where theft is okay. No, those things are constants, they're universals. But when it comes to some of the finer points of the Sharia, yes, they're going to change from community to community, and they're even going to change within the life of one community, as we saw with Muslims, when we saw it with khamr, alcohol. In the beginning, where the concept of Trinity come from. I'll say this, Shahida, when it comes to shirk, all shirk falls on just a couple different patterns, all of it. If you look at it briefly, it seems to be very complicated. Everybody's got different names and different deities, and this is the god of this, and this is the goddess of that, and it's tied to this constellation, and this is the feast day, and all this sort of stuff. Those are all just superfluous details. When it comes to actual idolatry, which Trinity is a type of idolatry, Abdullah ibn Umar said the same. Actually, Abdullah ibn Umar was of the opinion that men were not allowed to marry Christian women. And his reasoning was, he said, I don't know anything more idolatrous than to say that Jesus is the Son of God, even though that was a minority opinion. So idolatry happens in a couple of different ways. One of the main ways that idolatry happens is the suggestion that all of Allah's multiple characteristics are spread out over multiple entities, right? So we have Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one entity with 99 names or more than 99 names. Al-Alim, Al-Jabbar, Al-Qahhar, Al-Aziz, Al-Muntaqim, all these sorts of different things, okay? The satanic suggestion is to break up those characteristics, those names and attributes into separate gods, separate entities. And so when I want to win in battle, then I go out and I make my own shrine to who I think is Al-Muntaqim, the avenger, or Al-Jabbar, right, the compeller. And if I've made a mistake and I want to atone, then I've got a different shrine and a different statue and a different God who's called Al-Rahman or Al-Rahim or Al-Ghafur or Al-Ghaffar. That's probably the main. No, it is not. It's not off topic. So when it comes to why are they people of the book, if we believe that there's idolatry in their beliefs, or at least their beliefs are influenced by idolatry, because the root of their religion is authentic revelation. Okay, it wasn't merely made up. It wasn't merely just people inventing things for themselves. Even though it was corrupted and changed and distorted and manipulated, even exploited, even. You trace it back to the root, and there's an actual prophet that was sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with genuine revelation, which is why they're considered people of the book. And I could open a can of worms when it comes to that, but I probably shouldn't. I'll say this, in fiqh books, you'll often find that, and this is a masala, this is something that scholars disagree over, is it possible to extend the rules that we afford to the Christians and the Jews to other communities of faith if it is probable that their religion, even if it is heavily influenced by idolatry, was originally based in an actual prophet with revelation? There are many scholars that say yes, that is possible. And historically, Muslims, when they ran into Hindus, when they ran into even Zoroastrians, they were afforded some, if not all, of the privileges of people of the book, because yashbahu al-wahi, right? They have things like such as books, such as texts, and they claim like an original prophet and things like that. Now that doesn't extend to things like marriage, but when it comes to other issues, it's a discussion. Let's just say that. Okay, very good. Any other questions? Please feel free in the chat. Awesome, good. So that is the difference between Shariah and Aqeedah. That's the difference between theology and law, the difference between reality and benefit, right? And we can even say that within our own religious community, rules have changed. There is nasakh, there is abrogation of certain rules, like alcohol. Some of the companions were drinking alcohol on the day of the Battle of Badr. It was not yet impermissible, right? Hijab was not something that was legislated until well into the Medinan period, right? And so these things happen slowly. So at first, there was, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Surah Al-Baqarah that, okay, alcohol, it has good and bad, and the bad outweighs the good. And then in Surah Al-Ma'idah, years later, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, don't come close to the prayer. I believe that's Surah Al-Ma'idah. Certainly in Surah Al-Ma'idah, the final word on alcohol, ijtanibuhu. He calls it from the work of shaitan. Get away from it, stay away from it, don't even come near it. So that's an example of how what is advantageous to a community, and therefore what is the law for a community, might change slightly from time to time and place to place. And finally, last hadith of the chapter. Abu Khalid Hakim ibn Hizam reported that the Messenger of Allah ﷺ said, the seller and the buyer have the option to withdraw or annul, maybe annul might be a better term, as long as they have not separated, meaning like left their seats, right? If they speak the truth and make things clear, they will be blessed in their sale. If they conceal things and lie, the blessing of their transaction will be wiped out. Okay, this is referring to a concept in Islamic financial law that's called khiyar. So khiyar is basically the right to withdraw or annul a contract. And there's many types. This particular type is if you sit down, let's say you go to a bazaar, or whatever, one of these outdoor festivals, you're at a place, okay, you're sitting there, you're talking with the clerk, oh, that necklace looks pretty, I'd like that necklace, here's the money, here's the thing, you have it, okay, you're still standing there. In Islamic law, you're allowed to change your mind and say, you know what, on second thought, I don't want this, or I forgot, I need to put the money towards something else, or etc. And the seller is obligated to give you your money back. No discussion, right? This sort of no refunds policy, right, is in this particular situation, that's un-Islamic, right? As long as the people have stayed in place, they have not left each other, then refunds are an obligation if one side wants it. This is khiyar al-majlis, right? This is what it's called in Islamic law. More relevant to the actual chapter title is what the Prophet ﷺ says, because why would somebody not want to accept someone's refund or request for a refund if they just wanted to get the money out of them, right? Or if they were concealing something. This is a different type of khiyar. Somebody, they have a knockoff or something's wrong with it and they sell it and they're just in a hurry to sell it to you. Then you get home and you look at it, it's like, wait a second, this is it doesn't work. Like, oh no, all sales fine. Oh no. This is against Islamic law, the spirit of Islamic law, and the letter of Islamic law, where we want people to be truthful, to speak the truth. We want things to be clear, and we want to be, let's say, guarding the best interest of our fellow people of faith. And if we do that, Allah will bless the interaction and will bless the transaction, and buyer and seller will both be blessed in their lives. And if that's not there, then there's only going to be animosity and enmity and suspicion, and Allah will not bless it. And there's a famous story, and this will be the last thing I conclude with. Anybody have any final questions, then please put them in the chat box. There's a famous story of Abdullah ibn Abbas, one of the greatest companions of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, that he had a slave, and he sent his slave to the marketplace to buy him a horse, or to buy a horse on his behalf. And so the slave got to the market, he found a good horse, he starts haggling with the man, okay? And he talks the man down really, really far till he gets like a really nice price for this horse. So the slave comes back to Abdullah ibn Abbas, and he's like, yo, I got this awesome horse for you, and I got it at such a great price. It's such a good deal. You're going to love it. And so Abdullah ibn Abbas, he's like, okay, like, let's go back to the market together, and I'll pay up, and like, whatever, we'll get the horse. And he comes and he asks the seller, he says, did you agree to sell this horse for X amount of dollars or whatever? And he says, yes, I did. Abdullah ibn Abbas says, no, I won't do it, because your horse is worth far more than that. He said, instead, he's like, would you accept such and such an amount of money, X amount of money? And he raises the amount of money from what they had previously agreed. And the seller is like, this is crazy, but okay, yeah, sure, I'll agree. He's not going to deny more money. But Abdullah ibn Abbas wasn't done. He kept on raising it. He kept on saying every time, he said, no, your horse is worth more than that. Would you accept this much? No, your horse is worth more than that. Would you accept this much? And he kept on going until he ended up paying the man more than he had originally asked for. That is something that in Arabic is called nasuh, or from the same root as nasiha. A lot of times we translate nasiha as advice. That's not correct. Nasiha is loyalty, fidelity, and advice is the result of nasiha. Advice is the result of someone having loyalty towards you. They are loyal to you. They want what's best for you. So they're going to tell you. And so he said, no, I'll pay more. I'll pay more. I'll pay more. And then he walked away from the sale having paid far more. And the slave was just like dumbfounded. And he's like, I can't believe what I just saw. And Abdullah ibn Abbas said, I would never pay someone less than what I would accept for that same thing. He said, if I was in his shoes and I was selling that horse, I wouldn't accept less than this. And so that's exactly what I'm going to pay him. And that's sincerity, and that's fidelity and loyalty. And that's where we have to be at. Regretfully, this is something in the Muslim community that we struggle with. We're always looking for the fi sabilillah discount, right? We want to cut those corners. We want to lighten that bottom line as much as possible. When honestly, we should probably be looking at enriching our Muslim brothers and sisters. We should probably be seeking out our Muslim brothers and sisters to add to their pockets as much as possible, because that's going to make it back into the masjid, that's going to make it back to the Sunday school, that's going to make it back to all the sorts of services that we benefit from. And it's also worship. It's also worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, which is something that we kind of tend to forget, that we're able to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with everything we do, every dollar that we spend, not just when we put our heads on the ground. Okay, we've gone over time. Anybody, any questions? No, hijab did not start as a cultural practice. Hijab is Shariah, meaning it's from the law. And it has to do with Maryam is displayed as covering her hair. Yeah, well, Jesus is displayed as a white guy too. Right? Blue eyes, blonde hair, you know. Oh, I'm sorry, I misread. Maryam is displayed as covering her head. Yes, she is. But no, hijab has always been, listen, if you go back to pre-modern times, okay, if you go into every culture, let's not say maybe every culture, but the vast majority of cultures on earth, you find that people cover themselves, and that people take pride in covering themselves, and that covering themselves is actually associated with honor, right? Even today, you see the bride on her wedding day. What has she got? She's got this ridiculously unpractical dress that just, you know, with a train, and it just goes on and on. You got people holding it back behind her, right? More clothes, more honor. That's always kind of what it's been. That's like a very like fitra or fitri kind of human understanding, right? If we're going to put on our anthropologist lenses, right? But to say that it's just cultural, then we run into problems, because if it's just cultural, then it's something that can be discarded, right? But no, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said it pretty clearly in Surah Al-Ahzab. He said to drop your khimar over yourselves. And what was the understanding of the sahabiyat, the female companions, when they heard that ayah? They went and they cut off cloths and they covered themselves much in the same way as we do today. Now, what is cultural is the nudification of everybody, men and women, right? The skinny jeans and the underwear, which are glorified underwear, aka the bathing suit and all this sort of stuff. That's a cultural practice, right? And that's something that's purchased with marketing and advertising and all this sort of stuff. But both the fitrah and the Shariah are in line with modesty, covering, you know, dressing honorably, doing anything that's going to accrue or attract honor to you. Allah knows best. I hope I answered your question correctly. Maybe you meant something a little bit different. Actually, we had there's a young sister in the community, perhaps you all know her, who's Latina. Her family's from, I think, Ecuador or Peru, one of the two. And yeah, alhamdulillah, she accepted Islam. And so I was talking to her parents, and we did something for her. And I was explaining to them in Spanish that, you know, look at your daughter, or look at your relative. She looks just like all the pictures of Mary, right? Today, we think it's something weird. Why do we think it's something weird? Because we've been indoctrinated, you know, whereas every representation that you find of Mary, she's covered. So both culture and religion and fitrah, and Allah knows best. Any other questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Yes, at the time before the ayah was revealed, there was such a thing as a khimar, but it was not draped over the front, from what I understand. It was kind of like gathered around the back. And so, yes, the neck and sort of upper chest even maybe was visible. Whereas once the ayah says to draw it over yourselves and in front of yourselves in order to conceal. And then we get into the classic difference of opinion as to, you know, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made an exception for that which is apparent. And then we have the difference between Abdullah ibn Mas'ud and Abdullah ibn Abbas with their interpretation of what that meant. Abdullah ibn Mas'ud said that that meant the shape of the body, that you can't ever get away from displaying no matter how many clothes you wear. And Abdullah ibn Abbas said, no, what's apparent, the exception is the face and the hands. And Abu Hanifa made an analogy from that to the feet. And that's why there's differences of opinions on exactly what should be covered. Anything else? MashaAllah, this is a full hour. Ameen wa iyaakum. Thank you everybody for attending tonight. Okay, if that's all, then I bid you good night, inshallah. Stay tuned for updates. We might pause classes for a little bit, reload for the school year, the academic year. So if you're not in the women's WhatsApp group, please get connected and stay tuned for updates, inshallah ta'ala. So you'll know what's going on. And I'll see you next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.